So Hitesh and Vishal are the general partners. They run the fund. I'm a venture partner. Chris Kennedy, the grandson of the Kennedy brothers, he's a venture partner, and venture advisor is John Chang, who used to be treasurer and controller of the state of California,
Yeah.
very well known. They're all part of the fund. And then I'm reaching out to ultra high net worth individuals and some institutions in India, Asia, and especially in the United States, both Silicon Valley and East Coast, who don't necessarily see these type of Silicon Valley funds. So that's my role. I'm
So
not the investor, but I'm the organizer for the fund capital formation.
that the family office under the brand of Edgewood was started in late 1990s, and then uh, our fund that we started, fund number one, Redwood Collective, was started the vintage was 2022, and that's what Dinesh is part of. So I forgot to mention this. So we've taken the same strategies of Edgewood and extended it outside. So the first time we raised money from external sources was fund number one, and Dinesh is part of fund number two, which is probably a 2025, 26 vintage, and we're just started the discussions for fundraising for that as well.
So what's the what's your main focus now? Which way you want to invest? Early investors, which kind of technologies or pharma, IT? That's one question. Number two, in the last 3 years, there have been a couple of wars, global disruption in multiple ways, right? What impact is it having on this sector, the startup VCs market?
So our investments have been very simple. We invest into US funds, the funds that I mentioned, and we are sector agnostic as well as geographically agnostic, as long as the venture funds are investing into these different regions. We do not specifically invest in either a geographical fund or a sector fund from a technology perspective. Because just think about this, and you know technology, it's like fashion, comes in today, gone tomorrow. Everyone is talking about AI today, right? But before the AI was there 2 years ago, what was people talking about? Or what were people talking about? Was the cryptocurrency, right? It was about the digital assets, where it's about you can have a digital property next to Snoop Dogg in the sandbox for $1.2 million, right? Where's all that now? That's still there, but the early stage investments have gone differently. Another history lesson, Lalit, that I give is when I started my career in the late 1990s, just take yourself back into the late 1990s. What were people talking about? It's like, oh my God, holy shit, you can make websites. It's so great. And people who knew how to spell HTML charging $400 an hour. An hour. Today, for $250, the whole year, you can get a Wix site made. And then I remember in the 1990s, also after e-commerce, like, holy shit, you can buy products on the internet and you can put your credit card on the internet. Damn, that's so good. So fast forward 25 years later, now we're talking about AI. AI is the same thing. People are charging $1,000 an hour. The resources are very small. And my joke is very simple: is everyone who knows how to spell AI is an expert in AI, right? So Ganesh, definitely, but don't ask me how to spell artificial intelligence, because I don't know how to spell artificial intelligence. I don't have, so that's evil. So it's very simple. So all kidding aside, so coming back to your question, so we are not interested if there's only an AI focused fund or if there's a solar fund so we are invested in funds like a Sequoia, like a Lightspeed, who are very vertically investment, from healthcare to AI and AI. At the end of the day, it is an industry, but it's a technology. It's an overlaying technology that can go into different industries, correct? Law, it can go to education, it can go to healthcare, and go to whatever the case is, correct? So we are looking at funds that are investing horizontally into technology sectors and horizontally into geographical sectors. With that said, we are investing into venture funds. I would say about 70%, maybe 60 to 70% of our fund, is from the family office and also from Redwood Collective, is into later stage venture funds. So companies that are supposedly later stage, if you kind of look at it, the risk appetite for us has been significantly reduced, right? If you have revenue, that means you already have a product. If you have a product, that means you have gone through the product cycle. If you've gone through the product cycle and you've got revenue and you've got customers, that means you've already have a somewhat of a product market fit into the spiel of things. Compared to when there's only two guys with an idea, everything's a risk. So with later stage investments, I totally get it. Valuations are high, multiples are low. However, the probability of the company succeeding is higher.
Right.
So we have seen that companies, unless if you have a Google in a like a Sequoia 10, where it's an outlier, where the performance is just so amazing, the performance of venture funds, no matter if it's later stage or early stage, is typically 3-4x the fund over a 10-year horizon. So if you compute that backwards, it's maybe 30-35% IRR year over year. However, I don't look at IRRs. I look at only one thing, DPIs, right? Which is the distribution of the proceeds that you get back in terms of multiples, correct? A 3 to 5x DPI is great for me. It's great for anyone, right? But IRRs, as you know, are dependent on because they can do a lot of fudging in that. It's depending on a timeline. So some companies who return, some funds that return money early on, but doesn't return the fund, the IRRs are great. But the DPIs are very important in terms of calculations for me. So that was your first question. Second question is about disruptions. What can I ask you? What disruptions are you talking about in terms of that's happening in the industry? So I can answer your question much more.
General global disruption in terms of wars, healthcare disasters, political upheavals, right?
Yeah. So all of them are not short term, but they take short-term hits to institutional, not necessarily institutional investors, but retail investors. That's the reason you see the markets up and down. You saw what happened with this week with Iran and in Israel, right? The market dropped and now it's bounced back. But that's in the public market. In the private market, it's not significant enough to figure out because you're looking at a much more larger horizon, right? You're looking at a 3 to 5 year horizon, and when a company goes either IPO or M&A. So I don't think that is much of an issue. What is an issue is how do this FOMO happens before some of these large funds? Because if you look at it, Lightspeed, when they started in 2000, they had a $400 million venture fund. In 2022, they closed to $7.25 billion. I don't think they've announced yet, but they're closing more than $7.25 billion in the next quarter. General Catalyst, right? When I was speaking to Hemant about 2 years ago, he was saying that they're trying to close $5 billion. They announced they closed $8 billion. So going back to the issue of access supply of capital, these fund managers are just able to raise money. So what they're decided to do is they're putting money in the international markets, which is fine because those markets are growing. Right? You have Brazil, you have Latin America, which is just growing like crazy. Of course, India is there, but it's still about 10 years behind, maybe plus or minus behind China. Correct? I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Can you give us your impression about India and this market?
So India is a great, amazing market just because we have 1.5 billion people. I mean, they say we have 1.25 billion, but I'm sure we lost somewhere 250 million people. So I was round up. So we have 1.5 billion people. It's an amazing market. It's a market which is untapped right now because, well, let me rephrase. Untapped is the wrong word. It is, the jury's still out how vibrant the market perhaps could be. I look at India from a perspective of the same thing that we do, that America looks at Israel. So it's very common. I'm sorry, it's very parallel. The parallel is I was joking around, both countries start with an I, so Israel and India, where if India follows the Israel playbook, the playbook is very simple. Hardcore R&D, which India has, amazing talent, which India has. However, the Indian market, at least in my mind, is not ripe enough. What does that mean? That means is you have to make products for the world market. That's what Israel is doing. Correct? Israel, just because of the population-wise, I was there was a dinner somehow I got invited with where Benjamin Netanyahu was there in Delhi, and he was kidding around that there's I think 8 million people in Israel. He's like, okay, we can fit that in a neighborhood in India or in Delhi. So India has its population going for it. However, the unit economics somehow might not work. So that's one question. Or not one question. That's one point. Second point, that's the second point. The first point was that India is right because of talent. And if you look at what Silicon Valley is all about, it's only one thing, it's talent. So second thing was if India can follow the Israeli model. And the third thing is when countries, and this is not an India thing, because when people say that Bangalore, by the way, Lalit, I lived in Bangalore for 5 years because we invested into a bunch of companies, and I got sick and tired of people saying Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of India. I said, no way. It is not the Silicon Valley of India. It is the service capital of India. By the chance they're doing technology. And there's only one point. I finished this point. Bangalore will become the Silicon Valley of India only when you stop saying that Zomato is the Yelp of India, right? Flipkart is the Amazon of India, on and on and on and on, where you say this is India, meaning these companies are coming out of India, which are revolutionizing and bringing out the cutting edge. When you're doing copycatting stuff, and this is not an India problem, this is all a region problem. It's everywhere. You see this in Latin America, you see this part of Europe as well. So I always use the example of TikTok, right? China is competing against Silicon Valley on technology, and forget all the geopolitical issues or the political issues, what's happening about them storing data in the National Army of China as you look here. Forget that. They got 300 million people using that in the United States, or 200 million people using that in the United States, over 1 billion people using that worldwide. So once India stops saying that we are the whatever of India, that's when India has become and on the same page as Silicon Valley.
So what do you think when you consider investing in India, right? What are the issues you talk about? What are your basic parameters when people like you try to invest in Indian companies?
So I am the wrong person to talk about that. We're not investing into India. We did invest into India, and between 2008 and 2018, we I think in a nice way, I say that we were just too early. So I think that India, just because of the inertia that's happening, in terms of the market, in terms of the middle class growing, in terms of the wealthy just buying everything from a consumer perspective, I think it is India's next decade. And what Prime Minister Modi has done, and this is not a plug for him, but it's quite amazing in terms of the innovation economy that he's trying to build in the country with all the programs that he has. I remember when I was recruiting in India for a startup, everyone's like, why should I work for you, Vishal? Because I have an offer from Microsoft and Google, and my probability of getting married is much higher to a... Now everyone wants to work for a startup. Before Modi came in, working for a startup was, especially, and I've heard this so many times when people said they're single guys saying I'm looking to get married also. So, but that's not my problem.
You also mentioned that India is 10 years behind China, right?
Oh, yeah.
Prime Minister Modi is trying his best to take India to the next level.
Yeah.
And he has taken a lot of steps, right? What next can be done by the Indian government to speed up the process?
I think the governments just stay away from everything.
Okay.
Do not get involved. What he's done is from a periphery, at least what I've seen right now, is that he's promoting it. He's giving to visibility that startup, innovation, technology, this ecosystem is very important. Come and get into it. If you look at it from Silicon Valley, how Silicon Valley started, and I'm saying you can replicate it, but that doesn't mean that's going to be successful. In the 40s and 50s, right after World War II, what happened was, right? I mean, there's talent. Talent was from universities. What were the universities? Stanford and Berkeley. In the 40s and 50s, Stanford was not Stanford. It was like, really? Someone went to Stanford, like, why? Right? It was Harvard and Yale and Chicago and all that stuff, universities. Berkeley, why are you going to Stanford? So I think what happened was, if you look at the ecosystem, amazing talent, a lot of R&D. Okay, one thing that the government can do is spend a lot of money on R&D for these different universities. Second thing they can do is giving them an ease for taking the technology from universities and spinning them out into actual startups. Yesterday, I was mentioning to Dinesh, I was at Stanford's Hoover. They just started a Hoover Policy Accelerator. They're showcasing technologies, right? There's all the who's of Silicon Valley. They were there. They're looking at technologies. They're going to invest into those technologies, and it's going to become an amazing ecosystem. Another thing that the government can do is just not put the so-called Silicon Valley of India, which is Bangalore. They should have different hubs, because I've lived in Bangalore. Bangalore has just become too oversaturated. And one thing that Modi says, or Prime Minister Modi says well, is when you speak to him, is that he made Gujarat into an amazing economic ecosystem. Why? Is because he put businesses all over the state, not in one city, not in one region. The whole state is economically developing. And India is such a big country where you just cannot have one Silicon Valley. You can have multiple Silicon Valleys. And you see that growing, right? And you see it in Gurgaon area. You see that in the Pune area. You see that in, of course, Bangalore and, of course, Hyderabad. But there should be more and more regions which are being built. Third thing which the government can do is create these and incentivize these smaller cities like a Jaipur, like a Lucknow, Mysore has now become too big, where they're promoting economic development by having these companies set up shop there. Maybe they're doing that. I don't know. I've been to India over 5 years, 6 years. And then one thing that we were doing in India was a semiconductor project, semiconductor manufacturing, which supposedly we won a $2.5 billion award from the government of India, but we never saw the money. But that's not the point. We were setting it up in Gujarat in a rural area called Prantij, which is great because, and Gujarat, that's their strategy, right? They have different regions where they were going to put economic development. But when we went to Andhra, or when we went, well, now it's Telangana, right? Or when we went to Bangalore, or they wanted us to set up shop in Bangalore. And in Telangana, they wanted us to set up shop in Hyderabad. South wanted us to set up shop in a rural area where the economic development would happen. So last advice to the government of India, I don't know if this is good. Whenever you're setting up shop and incentivizing businesses, do not do it already in a metropolitan area, because the economics just doesn't work. Because if you look at, setting up shop like in Silicon Valley, it's going to be so expensive. So expensive.
Right.
And technology is something, and last point, technology is something that does not have borders, right? So you can be sitting anywhere as long as you have a connection to a Wi-Fi with and you can still get a lot of work done.
So where do you see the competition between China and India and US, all three together, or US is continue to be the lead in this sector?
Well, I think it's from a technology perspective, innovation will definitely happen out here. Going back to the point, China, I use only one matrix. When we stop saying that you are the Amazon of a country, you are the Google of a country, you are the Yelp of a country, you are the Uber of a country, right? Once we stop saying this, then you come to a floor, to a level. India's not there yet, is what I've seen. There might, and I'm sure there's a lot of amazing technologies that are happening behind the scene, but visually, China's there, right? It's a very simple example: TikTok, Shein, Temu, right? They just know how to do better.
Alibaba.
They just know how to do it better for a global market. So I think some of the investors in India are looking at different, where instead of, and China looked at, fine, you have an amazing domestic, but that's a given. If you do a technology, if you do a service, that's going to get the local market. But how do you obtain an international market, like what the companies that we just spoke about?
Anything else you'd like to say?
I think because of the new administration, and at least, like it or not, the perception is they are still business friendly. You see a lot of IPOs are going to happen. There's a lot of things in the buckets that I'm sure you know. There's probably 10 companies, at least in the technology field, that are going to go public. You saw Circle's IPO last week that we participated on June 5th. You saw Chime going out at 15 billion. You'll see probably another 10 technology companies. I'm talking about not the Valley, not in India. I'm sorry, the Silicon Valley, that are going to go out. And there has to be a circulation of this capital that's coming in. There's been a dry period for the last 5 years since 2021 that investors, people like me, have really starving for liquidity. And these companies that are going out at a much more healthier balance sheet, profitable perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Since you look at Rubrics, they went out at 6 billion. You look at Circle, they went out at a few hundred million. You look at Chime, when I think 800 million in revenue. Kraken is going out to, they'll probably be at 2 billion. I'm talking about revenue. I'm not talking about market cap.
Right.
Right. And then you have all of these private companies that are out there, right? You have an Anthropic at 4 billion. You have a Mistral at a few $100 million. You have a Databricks at 4 billion. You have an OpenAI at 10 billion. I'm talking about revenues now. At the end of the day, liquidity needs to happen. I think we'll see much more liquidity that's happening. And final point, I just don't get the concept where folks are, the pundits in Wall Street are saying that the market is not ready for an IPO. But if you look at it, the data is all from between $1 trillion to $10 trillion. The $10 trillion came from the chief economist from T. Rowe Price,
Mm-hmm.
where monies are sitting on the sideline, ready to invest into the market. Why aren't companies going public? And there are more and more funds that are going into the private industry, right? If you look at it, in 2020, there was $160 billion that went into venture. In 2021, there was $300 billion. It's come back down to just south of $200 billion. But that's a lot of money that's going into venture. Humongous amount of money that's going into venture.
Right.
So I think over the next few years, you'll see a tremendous amount of IPOs, a tremendous amounts of M&A, just whiz that we participated in. I mean, $32 billion are probably the largest acquisition ever of a privately held company. Went out. I mean, of course, it's regulatory issues. But the numbers are just changed, right? I mean, going public 30 years ago was 500 million. Now it's multi-billions.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks a
Thank
lot
you.
for